I wish we saw a lot more quiet moments in movies, where the camera lingers in the place and we can feel as if we're there, just being in a beautiful environment.
Welcome to the Pixel Paper Podcast, a series where we get to know the creative processes behind up-and-coming digital artists. My name is Noor, graphic designer and work-in-progress artist, and I'll be your host for this series. Today's artist is a Dutch artist who likes to emulate calmness through his work. Joey Pool is an early career illustrator who has worked on some really cool projects, including an interactive film which he worked on with an entire team. More info about that in the recorded podcast interview. Joey loves to transport people into different worlds through his art, and we traveled a lot as we had a lot of deep discussions around art. This is a nice, calming, yet thoughtful interview, so please enjoy this episode with Joey Pool. Hi Joey, how are you?
Hi, hello, I'm good, thank you.
For the benefit of our audience, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. My name is Joey. I'm known online as Joey Pool Art, and I'm a freelance illustrator from the Netherlands. I specialize in environment and background art. And in my personal art, I usually work with fantasy subject matters using strong colors and contrast. I always tend to aim for this dreamy yet very tangible vibe in a way. And professionally, I mostly work in the pre-production phase of animation, doing storyboard and color scripts, as well as sets, and of course do environment illustrations for animations. And I work in that area mostly because there's just a lot more work in it, and because I can draw quite quickly, while still retaining a good sense of composition, perspective, and color, which fits really well with the faster pace of a pre-production process. And of course, I also do commissions like album covers or fantasy paintings, and every now and then I also do a little bit of animated work. So yeah, it's a real mixed bag.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, there's so much to dive into there, but I just want to let the audience know why I wanted to interview you. And it's because of what you said, kind of your dreamy landscapes. You have really colorful work, but it's still quite tangible, again, like you said. So could you tell us a bit more about your work and the art journey that you have gone through to get to where you are now?
Yes, of course. I have quite a long history with drawing. I always drew a lot when I was a kid as well, but I never thought about it as something I could do as a career. That kind of changed when I watched the behind the scenes of the Lord of the Rings movies, and there were these two concept artists, Alan Lee and John Howe, and they made these beautiful pencil sketches, just designing how Middle Earth would look like. And I was blown away by the idea that could be a job. So that put me on the path of becoming an artist. But I mean, it took a while for me to find sort of my niche. So my interest evolved quite a bit. I also worked a little bit more with graphic design and communications. I also studied that. I lived 7 years in Sweden and did a preparatory art and design program there, and also a bachelor in visual communications. So for a long while, I thought that would be my focus, doing graphic design or motion design or animations, because becoming an illustrator or an artist is kind of daunting. But in the end, yes, I came back to drawing fantasy things because it kept me hooked. So 1 second, I have to think. So yeah, so after my bachelor, I decided to pursue that direction and become more of an illustrator rather than a concept artist. So that's a bit of my history. And I also, looking at my art, I used to draw quite a bit darker, but I slowly started discovering the whole color spectrum, and I loved how warm and atmospheric my more colorful paintings could be. And that direction was kind of strengthened after I had a portfolio review a few months after my bachelor at the art department in Eindhoven in the Netherlands. It's an industry event where a professional said to me, "Oh, I love your colorful work. You know, I want to see more colorful work in the business." And that idea really resonated with me. So that that kind of brought in the colors into my world. So, and then I started combining that with my love of designing and creating otherworldly places. And it became this, ended up with a desire to create these kind of detailed fantasy places, full of life and warmth, when one can just walk around and sit down, be chill and be happy. So, and though I want to draw very big, exciting, and nice environment paintings, the reality of working professionally, but also because social media is such a fast-paced medium, I rarely have the time to make those full, big fantasy paintings. So I also do these, quicker paintings, and that you will see nowadays mostly on my social medias.
Yeah, I mean that's really cool. I like looking through your Instagram. You can kind of see that you have this mix of dark paintings and then colorful paintings and then like a mix of those things, which is really cool actually. Yeah, I mean
Thank you.
I was wondering. You said that in your work as well, you do a lot of work that's very fast paced. So I wanted to know, as an artist myself, like how do you come up with quick illustrations, and how do you translate those concepts into a finished piece?
Well, for me, there's a difference for me between personal work and professional work. When I do personal work, I know what I like, and what I love to do is transporting other people into a sort of otherworldly place. So my mind is always wandering, looking for those places. And for me, otherworldly doesn't really mean alien to our own world, but more feeling wise. It's something we know not really come across in our daily life. So over the years, I've developed like a taste for things like fantasy airships, trains, stations, high bridges, viaducts, cozy warm corners, and wide landscapes full with grass and mountains. So these are sort of my tropes which I use for personal painting. So I can always fall back on them. And for me, then how I usually start is just with a thumbnail sketch. It's usually so roughly drawn that only I can understand it. But what's often the case is I already have a composition in mind. So I don't really do multiple thumbnails to figure out how I'm going to draw locations. Instead, I usually draw multiple locations, and for every location I draw one thumbnail and just choose the one I like the most. And sometimes I do a bit more of a cleaner sketch over it, but usually I just go with a rough color painting and just trying to figure down the correct mood and light. And then I start, of course, refining it. But when I work professionally, I do work a lot more organized. It's also kind of easier because the client will come with a brief. So if you have the brief, it becomes just problem solving. How can I fit all the elements in the composition? What color palette and lighting setup will work for the mood he's looking for? And how much time is there to paint? And those are like all concrete challenges. So it's quite a lot easier than when I'm doing personal work, where I'm always looking for something more abstract, something less tangible and more dreamy. So yeah, but that does kind of mean that I usually do better work for clients, because when I'm drawing for myself, I don't really know what I want to draw. But when I draw for clients, it's always all right, I need to have this, this, and this, and then it's good enough.
That's really interesting. So would you say that when you're doing personal work, you're kind of figuring out the drawing as you go along?
Often, yeah. So I do have that original sketch, but or the original concept, but then I always try to find a vibe that I don't really know yet. And I cannot really express it. So it's always a process of just looking and looking and looking until I find something that finally clicks for me.
And you mentioned like you have a lot of, like you listed a lot of things that kind of inspire you, like, you know, airships, train stations, grass and mountains, that kind of thing. But there's so many things, like how do you know what to choose? Is it kind of driven by your intuition or your feelings or emotions that day?
Definitely, yeah. So usually when I paint darker paintings, it's because my mood is also a little bit darker.
Right.
And I usually draw very sunny places during the winter because, you know, I I long for the sun.
Right.
And that's often also the case of compositions. You know, I have this feeling of, oh, I want to be in the air. And then I trying to draw a place that's a bit more, you know, with air around it. So maybe a high bridge or an airship. Um, so yeah, and of course, sometimes it's very easy to find an idea for a painting, and sometimes it takes a while.
And do you use references when you're doing your paintings?
Oh, definitely. I mean, but for my personal paintings, it's usually more of a mood reference, I would say, where I just look something up that kind of sparks an idea in myself, and then I use that as a base to develop my own idea. And of course, I also do sometimes use references for other objects and things, but that depends a little bit on, you know, how am I feeling? Because sometimes you just want to paint, and then is the process of looking up references is something that will hinder you of becoming into the flow.
True, that's true. And you also mentioned that you use a sketchbook sometimes to do your thumbnails, so that brings me on to my next question, which is, do you ever do traditional art at all?
I mean, not as much as I would like. I've done it quite a bit when I was younger, both at school and of course at home. But ever since I started digital painting, it's been on a downward spiral because I just simply work faster and create better looking results digitally. But I mean, I would love to break that trend because I really miss the meditative quality of, you know, real traditional mediums, you know, where you can just slowly fill an area with a paintbrush, listening to music and zoning out. That is something I don't really get to do with digital paintings.
Right.
And for me, I guess it's a matter of just starting doing traditional art again and being okay with working less quickly and certainly at first producing lesser results. Because for example, I would love to make oil paintings, but you know, it's a time-consuming process. So right now it's difficult to get into. But you were correct. I do sketch a lot in a sketch paper, and usually those sketches are like only I can understand them. You know, it's just purely personal.
Interesting. And do you sketch from life as well?
Yes, I do sometimes. Yeah, definitely. I do also look up references online, which I copy in sketching, like poses and that kind of things. But I also every now and then I also like to be somewhere and draw it. I think it's a very good exercise. I don't really do enough as a way.
Urban sketching.
Yeah, I would love to do it more.
Yeah, it's one of
And
my
I can
favorites.
also, yeah, it's also something I could recommend to everyone. Just that
Yes.
process of copying and then understanding what you're drawing is such a great way to grow.
Yes, definitely. I keep a small sketchbook, like A6 size, in my bag, and like a pencil in my
Ah,
bag. So whenever I'm kind of commuting to work or something, I can just quickly pull out my sketchbook and just do like a 5-minute drawing, and it's really been helping me actually.
oh, that's perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that sounds like the best size as well because
Yeah.
you know a bigger sketchbook is always something, you know, it's kind of a bothersome to take with you.
Yeah.
But A6, that's like perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also I discovered this app recently called Realistic Paint Studio, which is
Okay.
it's kind of like it's a simulation of traditional media, and it's actually really good. I mean, obviously it's still digital painting, but you get pretty much everything on it. You get sketch pencils, you get watercolor, you get oil painting. The oil painting is kind of a bit meh, but the rest of it's pretty good, like the soft pastels and everything. It's really cool, so maybe you should check that out. Maybe you'll
I
enjoy
will
it.
definitely, yeah, because I do like other drawing apps. I also have tried how is it called again? Heavy paint.
Heavy
And
paint. Oh, I love heavy paint.
yeah, it's so. I mean, oh my God, it's one of the things where you think I want to do this more.
Yeah,
And then,
definitely.
so yeah, wow.
Definitely. What do you use normally?
On the go, I usually have my iPad with me and use Procreate. And then, of course, when I'm at home, I'll work in Photoshop. But I also have like a sketchbook, and then in my sketchbook, I love to paint with like just a normal pen, so not a pencil. I don't know, when you're working with a pencil, you want to make it pretty, and when you're working with a pen, you're just there to get it done in a way.
You don't have an eraser for a pen.
No, exactly, indeed.
Yeah, exactly. And you do animations as well, right?
Yes, a little bit. It's a sort of a byproduct of my bachelor study, where we did like a lot of different things, including animations. So I animate primarily in After Effects. I've done a little bit frame by frame animation, but only like something small to enrich my After Effects animation, like grass in the foreground, for example. Looks way better when you animate it frame by frame than when I'm moving it in After Effects. It looks a little bit too digital.
Right.
But yeah, After Effects is like a great tool for environment artists. And it's super useful to understand if you're doing background art. And it's so cool to just give your illustrations a bit of life with just a few minor tricks. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, do you make your assets in like as a raster, or do you make them as a vector when you're doing it in After Effects?
Oh, definitely raster still.
Okay.
So I mean, I know it should be vector, and I'm kind of the odd one for using Photoshop, even when I'm doing clean drawings. But I don't know, I feel so comfortable in Photoshop that I work so much quicker. And in the end, if you're doing like background paintings for something, and you don't really need to zoom in a lot, you can get away with pixels just perfectly.
Okay, interesting. And I feel like the work that you post on your Instagram is kind of different to your website. Like, I feel like your Instagram is a bit more painterly. So how does social media kind of play a role in your art journey?
Yeah, my work is definitely more painterly and atmospheric in my Instagram account. And I think working, I think Instagram is and other art platforms are really important. And the things I post there are what I would consider my true calling, my true art. Whilst the work I do professionally here in the Netherlands, it's what I would call more product illustrations, where the illustrations are meant to be products for someone else. And what's interesting for me is that social media is a sort of a way to reach a larger audience internationally and show yourself and potentially also attract clients with it in the long run. Because in the beginning, of course, when you start social media, you don't really have a big following. You won't get any real work from it. So you have to look for that maybe more local, in local networks. But for me, it's really, as long as I keep on posting on Instagram and keep developing my own art style, and it will grow and grow and grow. One day I will get more and more offers via that channel, and I will be able to do more of the stuff I really like, which is fantasy paintings. So I would definitely recommend everyone to do some sort of social media account with their art, just for the long run, not for right now, but for maybe over 5-10 years.
Yeah. I mean, social media is like you have to stick it out for the long
Yeah,
run,
yeah, yeah.
definitely. Yeah, I mean, do you kind of have a content strategy or do you just kind of go with the flow?
Oh, I wish I had a content strategy. I really go with the flow at the moment. It could definitely use some more structure. So for example, I posted 50 days after each other in the beginning of the year, and since then I've posted maybe 2 or 3 times. So that's not a lot. So yeah, I could do with a bit of strategy.
Interesting. Um, sorry, one second. Yeah, and I mean, I was looking through your website, and you did a really interesting project, which is an interactive film called Robin. So could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, of course. First of all, very impressed by your research. It's a very specific question, but I would love to talk about it.
Uh-huh.
So, Robin is basically the first real project I worked on. It's an interactive animated movie where the audience, may it be a single person at home or, for example, during a screening at a cinema or festival, can make the decision for the main character called Robin, who we follow from birth in 2020 to old age.
Okay.
And the decisions are dilemmas based on science, technology, and climate. For example, one of the questions is, would you, dim the sun to combat catastrophic climate change? Or another one would be, would you surrender your homeland to a hostile invading force because an algorithm tells you to do so? So it's
Wow.
all like these very odd and interesting futuristic questions. And it was a movie financed by the Dutch Research Council and produced by a design company here in Amsterdam called Public Cinema.
Okay.
And what made it so special for me was, to set the stage, I had finished my bachelor's in Sweden and I had moved back to the Netherlands after 7 years living abroad. And at that point, I did not really have a network to speak of or even done an internship. I did some odd graphic design jobs here and there, but working in the field of illustration felt very far away. So at some point, someone connected me to an animation director on LinkedIn, and that animation director contacted me several months later and encouraged me to apply for this project. And I had an interview and was offered a deal to work there for 6 weeks. But in the end, those 6 weeks turned into 13 weeks, and I was there for the whole production. So, and we were a small team of around 10 young artists, varying a little bit in number. And in those 3 months, we made 90 minutes of animated content, which is really a lot. And I contributed by doing storyboards. I did some layout work. I made color scripts. I made concept art, and of course, I illustrated background art. I did not animate, but it was an additional inspiration to refresh my After Effects skills afterwards. But yeah, it was an amazing project for me because it was perfectly timed. It was a great learning experience, and I made some amazing like-minded friends and started a bit of a network. And of course, I could draw some really fun stuff, futuristic cities and those kind of things. So yeah, it was the start of me working professionally, and that makes it very special to me.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. I think that's such a cool project to start your career with, pretty much.
Yeah, and it was out of nowhere. It was like, at one point I've never done really an illustrated job, and a few weeks later I was employed for several months working on a super cool project with amazing people.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I'm quite curious, like, how do you illustrate stuff for things that don't even exist, What was your process for that?
I mean, you would think there would be a lot of research in what the future would hold, but because of the time pressure, we just had to make it up in a way. Of course, the concepts were based on scientific research, but we, as artists, we were kind of free to do whatever we want. And you just, of course, you have some direction, and you try to make it look futuristic, and there are certain ways to do it, of course, by making everything more clean or bigger, or with high-tech windows, those kind of things. But yeah, it was honestly, it was a really a process of just, all right, make something up.
But how do you make it look realistic? Or was that not your intent?
No, luckily it was not our intent to make it realistic. We had a kind of a very strong color script, so sometimes it was very hard to make it look realistic. When I had to use purple for a dike. A purple. How would you make a dike look purple? So yeah, we didn't really have to make it realistic, but of course you still need to have all the sort of animation things, tropes in there. Like there had to be a bit of perspective, a bit of atmospheric depth, and all the kind of things. And good lighting, of course, was very important.
Right. And how did you kind of work together in a team? Like, how was the work split between you all?
So yeah, basically in our case, we had one person who was part of the team, but was also more or less the art director in a way, just directing us. And of course, we had a producer also handing out what we had to do, and a director. But otherwise, it's also a lot of just talking with each other. I'm going to do this part. Oh, you're going to do that part. And of course, you each have their own specialty. So I was definitely an environment artist. Okay. So I drew. I think I've never drawn a character for the project. Maybe once or twice. So then I stay in that niche, and I communicate a lot with the other environment artists, but of course also with the people drawing characters, because in the end I need to draw the background and someone else is going to draw the character in it. So it was a great experience of just learning how to communicate and how to do that. And back 2 years ago, everything was still on location, so we were all in the same room. So that made it kind of easy and a lot of fun. Of course, we joked a lot, or we joked around a lot. A little bit too much, maybe.
And how do you kind of make a film animated? Like, what's the behind the scenes of that?
How you make it? For me, it's the process is kind of straightforward, but also time consuming. So you always work from a script, and from the script you make the storyboards, very roughly drawn, and then you have a step of I would call it layout. We call it shot design in the process, but you basically design how the shot is going to look like. Where are all the objects going to be? How big are the persons? Those kind of things. And then we would just illustrate them. And it was not a frame by frame animated movie, but everything was animated in After Effects. So the characters barely moved, but it was way more of, all right, we have all these layers, we put them into After Effects, and we have some sort of camera movement going through them, and some effects, and that's how we animated them. So yeah, and then of course you have also things that go well, things that go wrong, things you have to redo. But honestly, it was kind of organized and straightforward.
That's good. And is making art for animation different to making art which is just still image?
Oh, definitely, because basically in animation you have a lot less time. If I do an illustration for someone, it will take me a day or even a few days. But in this process, certainly for this movie, of course, it can be different for other movies. We had to do multiple backgrounds per day. And of course, you also have to deliver the backgrounds in a way they can use it to animate it. So you have to separate the foreground, the midground, the background into layers, and make sure you paint behind certain objects. So if you make a camera movement, you don't suddenly see a blob of white moving into view because you didn't really draw behind the building. So there are those kind of differences as well.
Wow, That just reminds me of another app actually that I recommend, which is called Mental Canvas. You should definitely check that out. It's really cool.
Oh,
You
really?
basically get to draw in 3D. It's really cool.
Oh, wow. I'm really
Yeah.
curious right now. I'm gonna check it out afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that old. It's like a couple of years old, I guess, but I think it's been in beta testing, and the iPad version only came out earlier this year. So it's relatively new, and I've just been testing it out recently, and it's really cool. Like, you basically draw on different planes, but the point is, like, when you look at it at a certain angle, it looks
Yes.
like 3D. But like when you start
Wow.
panning around it, it's basically a mess. I really don't know how to explain it, but
Oh, it sounds like projection mapping.
yes, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, no,
It's
in
really
After
cool.
Effects, it's just, you have a 3D space and you put your
Yeah.
layers
Yeah.
in there, and then you can have a camera and just move a little bit through them, but especially you cannot do really big motions because then it will become very old very quick. Though
Yeah.
we did manage to make like a very long shot, zooming from something very small to all the way out. That was really fun to do.
Wow. Did you have to draw the entire thing? I'm assuming.
Yeah, so I did.
Oh.
I had to draw everything except the characters, but of course I did not animate it. But of course it ended up being quite an easy animation because you just had to make the zoom.
Yeah. Yeah, I
But
can
the
imagine.
computer was like having a bad time rendering everything.
Wow. What size would the files be like when you're doing animation?
I mean, usually they're quite okay, but in that specific case was when I drew like the big zoom out drawing. I worked very large, so
Oh.
you get like several hundreds MB, and I also made a big poster for the project, and I think that was over a gig for
Oh,
one
wow.
Photoshop file.
Sorry, let me rephrase. What dimensions would the canvas be?
Oh, sorry.
No, no, my bad,
uh,
my bad.
no. That makes way more sense.
Yeah.
So we worked in aspect ratio 16:9,
Okay.
and we worked in HD. Or the final result we had to deliver was in full HD, so 9020 by 1080.
Right, right.
But we worked, of course, a little bit bigger, so we had room to spare.
Oh, that's good. Would you recommend doing that?
You working on such a project or
Just
working in
like
that
for
size?
animation in general.
Definitely. I mean, it's a very good thing to be able to do animation, and there's also a lot more work in animation nowadays than I think in illustrations, because it's not only like the sci-fi movies or the
Yeah.
animations you see on TV that are animated, but it's also all the infographics, all the advertisement, everything has to be moving nowadays. So it's definitely an asset if you know your way around animation, or at least know how to provide your Photoshop files in a way that animators can use it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's so true. Like, you, even just a bit of movement, like, people are a lot more impressed by it than just a still image.
Oh, definitely, yes. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm quite curious. I mean, you mentioned that you're an illustrator, but you like doing concept art. So, kind of, where do you draw the line between the two? I mean, do you want to become a concept artist, or do you want to just stick to being an illustrator? And do you think an illustrator, like, is the work that they do different to each other?
I think it's all overlapping nowadays, honestly. I define myself more as an illustrator because I want to make finished products. Whilst, of course, a concept artist, you're making art for a project.
Right.
But so in the end, I do love to be more of an illustrator, but that's the thing about this industry. It's also nice to switch heads every now and then.
Yeah.
So if I only do illustrations, only finished artwork, it can also become quite tedious. So then it's nice to switch it up and do a little bit more concept art, or work in a pre-production phase of an animation, where you can draw in a different way. So yeah, they're different, but they're also the same, basically.
Yeah, that's cool. And I'm not sure if you mentioned this during this interview, but I'm looking through your script, and you said that you did a bachelor called Visual Communication plus Change. right?
Yes, yeah. It's it's the odd one. So basically, I had a long period where I didn't know really what I wanted to become creatively, and I thought, oh, I might do something in graphic design and visual communications. And then I was looking for bachelors because I also, of course, I've also an interest in political things, in geopolitical things, in issues around the world. So at that point, I thought I'm going to combine it. I'm going to study visual communication, something visual, and then also combine with my interest in creating a better place in this world. And the program was all right. It was not that good, honestly. And in the end, I did switch back a little bit more to more fantastical paintings. But it is something I do a lot in my normal freelance work, where there is usually, it's always nice when there's like a plus change factor in a project. When you have the feeling from, all right, I'm also doing something good with my illustrations. So yeah.
Yeah. And would you say that the Robin project kind of was the first step in that positive change cycle?
Definitely. I think in a weird way, it was a project made for my program. Looking back, because they always talked about futuristic scenario and scenario writing as a way to communicate. So it was a big coincidence, but it aligned perfectly with my with my studies.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
that was really cool to do.
Definitely. And what kind of messages do you want to leave with your artwork?
So on a personal note, in my personal artwork, there's not a lot of plus or positive plus change messaging. Personally, I make art because I love the feeling of being transported to somewhere else.
Yeah.
Not necessarily as an escape from real life, but to temporarily feel something different.
Right.
So for me, a good example is I just love the idea of imagining myself being in one of the higher tiers in Minas Tirith from the Lord of the Rings movies. Surrounded with white marble, looking out over a beautiful, vast landscape. Just being there, sitting there, walking there, imagining the wind and the sun. So I love creating that feeling. And as a kid, I also started designing my own cool places or potential cool places.
Right.
And I continue doing that. So in my personal art, I'm trying to capture that feeling, creating some sort of window into an otherworldly place where you just want to be.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of deeper meaning in it. No, just, wanting to take the person watching it and escaping with him for a little bit within the artwork.
And okay, so you talked about your personal work, but professionally, what kind of draws you towards a client work? Like, is it the message behind it, or is it just the client itself?
Right now, at the moment, is mostly you. I mean, I'm still in the phase where I say mostly yes to client work. And it's usually because of the network I have and the people I know that know me and know how I can work and how I could fit in their project. So I honestly have a little bit of a problem with saying too much yes to work and then not being able to do my own thing. So I would love to be more, strict with what kind of jobs I would take on. But I imagine that's going to take like a few more years.
Yeah. I feel like as when you're like a young creative, I'm assuming you're still like in your early career stage.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, so I think when you're young, like you need to say a lot of yeses before you can start saying nos, because you need to know what you like doing and what you don't like doing, before you start saying no.
That's so true. It is so true. Exactly. You need to know what you like, what you don't like, and you need to build that network, and you can do that locally, but of course also online via social medias. And I think someone once said, oh, it takes around 5-6 years before you can start saying no to projects. Of course, that's not entirely true. If I get a really weird project, I'll say no. Or if I'm scheduled for something else, I say no. But and that's the reality of being an artist, especially an illustrator, is that you have to deal with a few years where life is less stable and less controllable.
Yeah. But in a way, that's like you'll look back on it and you'll be like, oh, I miss those days,
Yeah, definitely. Like that's so true. Like in the moment, it's a lot of work, but afterwards you think, oh, those were the good days. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And who or what inspires you? I mean, I know you mentioned a lot of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit too much, but yeah, I love those movies. I love those books. Also, especially the other books by Tolkien, I feel they have an amazing tone. And but lately it's been I've been really inspired by all the Studio Ghibli movies. So I started watching them all, and they really have a really big effect on my taste in art. And just the lush and the green locations, the signs are amazing in those movies. And I love to see art from other people online on Instagram, or also of course in real life, but nowadays mostly online. And whenever I see a beautiful vast landscape, or a little cozy corner somewhere, I just save it, because that inspires me a lot.
I mean, the Studio Ghibli, I was just looking through our Instagram, there's this one picture of the train or the tram, like in the ocean. That's so Spirited Away.
I mean, it was basically straight up copied from Spirited Away,
but
just
with
their
really
own camera angle. Yeah,
it's
I
really
just
nice.
love
Like
that
it's a
scene.
different take on it.
And also, I love that. I love that in animation and movies, because that scene is, a bit of nothingness in the movie. Not a lot happens, but I wish we saw a lot more quiet moments in movies. Where the camera or lingers in the place, and we can feel as if we're there, just being in a beautiful environment. So yeah, that's a great scene.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, what you said about it's so quiet and there's not much happening in the scene, but it's definitely like what you've said previously in the interview. It's about that feeling that it evokes. So many people relate to that.
Yeah, and it's very hard to define that feeling. I've tried a lot of words, and nowadays I use usually dreamy and tangible, or otherworldly. But yeah, just a feeling of being somewhere else in an interesting location, and yeah, I love to capture that.
Yeah, definitely. And when you find reference images, how do you use that in your artwork?
Generally speaking, I use references in two ways. The first way I use references, like I also said earlier, is to spark an idea, and that can be a photograph or a painting or even a still from a movie. I can, for example, look through a website like Pinterest, just looking for something that hooks me with something interesting. May that be a landscape, or a certain color palette or composition, and then I'll use that reference as a jump start for my own ideas. And of course, the second way I use references is to help me paint certain things. So, I'm not a purist. I don't think people should always use references. Sometimes your own imagination can create stuff that might not be accurate, but is still really unique and fresh.
Right.
But it always helps to reference something when you're painting. And what's interesting, what I've learned also over the years, is that it's not only like, oh, I'm going to reference a face, or I'm going to reference how clothing looks like. You can also reference style. You can look up a painting. For example, if you would paint, like, how would you paint a city in the distance in an interesting way? You can look at other art to see how other people solve that problem. or if you're not sure how the contrast in your image is working, you can look up movie stills with the same kind of feeling you're looking after, and then compare your own artwork to that scene and see how the colors differ and how the contrast differs. So there's a lot of way to use references.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even in like some of your kind of moody paintings especially, it kind of reminds me of like master paintings. I mean,
Oh yes, yeah, I love master paintings, especially when they go all moody and dark and with impressive skies. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. I had a question and now I've forgotten it. Anyways, no problem. So I'll jump straight to my last question then, which is, what would you like to say to your future self, future Joey?
All right. Yeah, that's kind of a difficult question.
Yeah.
What I would say is keep on making the things that you love, and make it important to do so. In the end, if you neglect to do what you love, nobody will end up knowing you for that, and nobody will hire you because of what you want to do. And also, I would say to myself, but also others artists, stop stressing overly or too much, and learn to balance life and work a little bit more. And it's all some sort of great adventure. So I have to learn at least to enjoy it and stop overthinking it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful message, I think, to leave for all artists or creative people in general.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Joey. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's been an honor. It was a real good time.
I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed conducting it. I really appreciated his views on creating art that explores more of the quiet moments. You can follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any other podcast app. And alternatively, you can subscribe to the podcast on Substack and get both the audio and article interviews straight into your inbox each week. And of course, you can follow on Instagram and Twitter at PixelPaperPod. And all the links will be either in the podcast episode description or in the description of the podcast itself. And with that, I will see you next week for another episode.